Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Carmine's Arena, a cultural gourmet of information, if you will, a feast for your mind and soul. And now, without further delay, the man, the myth, the maestro, Carmine Arena.
Greetings and welcome once again to Carmine's Arena, site of contest and conflict, venue for and of resolution. Resolution in terms of focus, remedy, and commitment, both yours and mine, to the preservation, the propagation, and indeed the celebration of Western civilization. I very much want to share with you a moment of sudden intuitive understanding, a flash of insight, a scene of sense experience that occasions a personal epiphany preserved in this my prose poem litany, whose music means so very much to me. Here goes said prose. In a self-sown forest grows this mighty tree, more than wide enough to encompass me. I pillowed against its flanks, caressed its boggy planks, and was soon thereafter to scale its branchy ranks. Hiding poorly a telltale angst, I nearly stopped short of the top, yet was tugged upward for its sweet airs to eavesdrop. Once there, at the close-up summit of my tree, I reached out and rediscovered thee. When I climbed back homebound, a lifetime rewound, I arrived again, that other me. Prose poetry, as is plain to see, is a hybrid form of poesy, which concentrates the energy of language to seize meanings as if it were the norm, a norm unbookworn, wayworn, or too Yahoo earthborn. For once, not all that long ago, we were a much happier breed whose blessed freedoms were not squandered and left to wander across political license to seed. Now this resulting deep-wrapped unhappiness, gone unrelieved, seeks leave to banshee fancy free, and unto death saps the talkie-talkie, to legalize drugs and other humbug, for to happiness guarantee. Today's wickedness warranted for victimhood off on its dead-end spree. With the above, I more than love to disagree, as you will see, lest we become that itchy pedigree of chimpanzee, whose self-esteem shall remain unredeemed, even though knee-deep as if in teenager smithereens, all dither, hither, and thither, self-demeaned. In this my yesteryear's harvest, I wish to hearken back to remember my mother and father, whom I love deeply, though we were divinely commanded not necessarily to love, but to spotlessly honor. Thus a love God unlooked for, and yet, as their shepherds crooked and nooked and reset often, I serve as loving memory's middleman, taught to neighbor my fellow man, and in any arena to make a stand with unbought valor. My mom and dad's mirrored victor, an arena on perpetual novena, hopefully encored as their worthy successor. Now, there are so many moments these days when it is that I'm tempted to go along with R.D. Laing, a Scottish psychologist, who in his book, The Politics of Experience, maintained that 'tis not people who are mad, but the world. Yet what does a body do when faced with a planet which rotates about our secret outlets as for a second-rate magnet? Yes, 'tis all too easy to fault the inanimate instead of we simian primates, who desecrate, abominate as dystopia's inmates, who pickpocket all too willing targets. We their pet flibbity-gibbets, grinning gibbons in sunbonnets, mistaken for icons and liberal paragons. Let's see what we may learn, and perhaps what we'll soon, all too soon, spurn, as I here in review my inherited history. My dad was born in the closing years of the 19th century, which until 1914 was to know and enjoy the absence of world war. This promised for his son to be a good 99-year augury, though of course this was not to be. Unlike the 19th, my 20th century was to know the agony of 2 world wars, which shall live in infamy. But wars won thanks to America accordingly, adroitly, yet never ever imperially. I should like to add parenthetically for America's American haters, eat your heart out, and may you suffer boycott until you earnestly turn about individually and individually bow to America's validity. Where was I? Back to my dad, who was born in the 19th century, in Naples, Italy. Yes, Italy, not the one in Florida. Naturally, he spoke classic Italian fluently, and also the songful Neapolitan dialect, a dialect which has become Napoli's sonic treasury, and which my dad spoke joyously and with familial plasticity, teaching me, as it were, both these musical acoustics, domestically and yes, eurythmically, gave to me an inexhaustible luxury of harmonies, allowing me memories that have earned the resonance of this episode's conjury. For I was thereby also enabled to accommodate my dad's mom in her native and only tongue. Yes, Grandma's songful tongue. For even as a child, I Neapolitan merrily spoke and folk sung, becoming Mama Nona's favorite grandson. My quite beautiful mom, Dad's one and only, was born in the beginning of the 20th century, born where I one day in her arms was to be nursed and rocked away in an interlocked potpourri called Brooklyn, where we all spoke Brooklynese no matter one's native mouthpiece. I since lost its absurdy-wordy, but occasionally still falter when the old mocking-birdie flocks its clang, and I'm whiz-bang-boomerang then left with its brand of overhang slang, with which to grandstand the hoity-toity. Now so much for potpourri in Brooklynese, though it was an English lord who took exception to our believing we had won the colonial war as liberty's protectors. He claimed the British were particularly astonished by our manner of speaking English, and charitably placed marbles in our mouth in order, and I surmise to admonish, for to embellish, the English we didst blemish. When it was that we lost, all our marbles. The English left with this hopeless task unfinished, and until this very day find us colonials, verbally outlandish. Now, Dad, though a furrier by trade, was an Italian kitchen pro, loved to cook like my mother loved to bake. Mom, who also was envied in the artist brush-making industry as a dynamo who later taught her hubby a quite remunerable hobby in toto. Meals at our house were to reveal their daily appeal, many a time arriving truly genteel and quasi-holy. Small wonder that we hadn't become roly-poly, suffering from overstuffed melancholy. No taste and nutrition were up to Mom and Dad's discretion, sans haste of introspection, just merry inventions, ever creative, of ever newer corrected predilections. My elder sister and I were never potlucked nor short of awestruck. Years later, my inspired sister opened her own restaurant on Lexington Avenue in New York City and was a critical sensation, admired and desired for her remarkable gustatory creations. Allow me now to tell you my schoolboy story. I was in second grade, and after the summer break, we were asked by our teacher what we had for breakfast that morning. Each in turn said their piece, and when my turn came, I delivered that morning's menu. My teacher scowled and announced that I was a liar who was to return the next day with my mother. Now, when in those days a teacher was angered, you were in danger, unlike today when guilt-ridden parents show up with their lawyer, who act as a brat's rearranger, the teacher treated as a hostile stranger. Well, sure enough, the very next morning my mother arrived, I puzzled, worried, and contrite. My teacher recited from notes what I cited, namely 12 freshly squeezed oranges, a stuffed artichoke, broiled trout, and toasted homemade bread. Mom looked at the teacher and then me, looked at me despairingly and disparagingly, and clucked that I had forgotten to mention the eggnog she made, eggnog laced with espresso. The look on the teacher's face is the quality of chagrin that, lo, these many years later, still sets me a grin. I, of course, was justly left undisciplined, not a liar nor amplifier. I wasn't so lucky next time. Oh no, when I was invited by the principal to leave my seat in the assembly hall, come to the stage and sit at the grand piano, my cousin, who was older and sat in the elevated ranks of a sixth grader, had bruited about that I was a piano prodigy. Long story short, I ended playing up to lunchtime, and when I returned from having a hot lunch at home, the entire school was reassembled and classes canceled. I continued with my unplanned debut, playing Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, Chopin, Schumann, and Gershwin, followed just before dismissal by my accompanying myself singing Neapolitan classics and a Jerome Kern number or two. The applause was not polite, but floodlight, and I in its blessed sight. My principal congratulated me public just before Friday dismissal and handed me a sealed envelope addressed to both my parents. The letter requested that I was to learn later, that Mr. and Mrs. Arena were to meet her Monday morning at 8:30 a.m. sharp. Upon reading this, my father, waving the letter, flew towards me and live at a slap I can still renew to a thunderclap. I better wished were thumbscrews. Now, if teachers were deeply respected, principals were revered, and so, you can bet my parents along with me were in place 1/2 hour before due time. I was told to remain outside the principal's office while she spoke to my parents, who I could see through the glass panes of the principal's oak doors. They were smiling from ear to ear. My father's chest was raised high, as were my hopes that I had done nothing to despise. The principal emerged from her office with my parents following. She presented me with a signed book, a certificate of merit, and 5 gold stars, and announced that I was that day to be skipped ahead by 2 grades. Much later, I was also to learn that she implored my parents to make certain piano lessons would never, under any circumstances, be interrupted. That if there ever was a question of funds, she'd personally see to a scholarship. I immediately was escorted to my new class with memorable fanfare, and my parents left. Now here's where it gets interesting. When we gathered that evening for dinner, no one said anything to me, least of all my father. Finally, impatient and exasperated, I addressed my father and asked if I didn't deserve an apology for that slap and a weekend of misery. His answer was as simple as it was unblinking. He retorted, "It's a good thing nothing was wrong, or else you would get it again." My, how things have changed, have they not? I soon, of course, laughed it off, knowing I was as well loved as I was well fed. Certainly not despised nor compromised. Today, I could retell that story another way, making me an unemancipated victim of abuse, whose parents were out of the loop, obtuse, but 'twould be hot air I do naught but now confute. In reality, my dad never spoke the word love, but for him, and for him it was too sacred. No, he did not speak it, but loyally showed it. Showed it to me in ways there just isn't time enough to convey. In other episodes, I'll occasionally be doing so, for he took great pride in civilization's aims never being disobeyed. And Carmine's Arena, as you well know, is that place of action, which acts on behalf of civilization, as our home away from home upon which we must seek moral traction. However much from home we roam and groan, seeking distractions. I remember as I get older how much more I sound like my father. You know, that guy we have figuratively to kill in order to write our own playbill. The guy you'd rather disassemble than ever resemble. Well, wait until he grows memorable and you truly measurable. That is the distance between fulfilled or the dunghill. My mom and dad had a marriage that lasted some 65 years. This enviable pair were once commonplace. I hope one day again they shall be universally retraced and properly replaced. For what obtains today is to be understood as shamefaced. Yes, anarchy's restless dwelling place. At 90, Dad had a stroke. His very last words were, "Don't forget, Carmine, I made lasagna for your mother. You'll find it in the freezer. Make sure she eats. He lingered one very long week in the hospital. I could see he was struggling to stay. It finally dawned on me that this man who didn't speak love didn't want to desert his wife, even against the discourtesies of death. I leaned close to his ear and I said, "Dad, I'll take care of Mom the same way you did. She will want for nothing. If you want to leave, you can." Gesturing for me to take his gold ring, his labored breathing returned to normal, and he died within minutes. His love was our legacy. His loyalty, an inextinguishable, quiet reality. Mom was to follow him 14 months later. As she died, she smiled. Thus, to remold remembrance is our obligation, an obligation to tutor the future, to censure all that's remotely impure, that to high pressure we unbending all must learn to endure. So to conjure wisdom and rapture, ere our faith-cured departure, culture its very self undisfigured, we, once again, civilization's epical epicures, its structure assured, unperjured, altogether secured, male and female in place of our all too many mannequin shenanigan impostures, a rife for personal perditions, atheists again turned agnostics in skeptic composition, moving from disbelief to doubt, thus becoming at the very least God's loyal opposition, who unflaggingly continue to scout, so to prevent their altogether heading deep south for severe rendition. Having lacked and sidetracked sincere contrition. Ah, yes, contrition. Sponsored by shame and guilt, rearranged full tilt to be inframed golden gilt, to reset coordinates for newer havens well built, high above immoral silt, perhaps ever closer to our better angels' choir of heavenly lilt. 'Tis time now to hearken back, to recap, to recapture and summarize. You will recall at the outset I said these words. In a self-sown forest grows this mighty tree, more than wide enough to encompass me. I pillowed against its flanks, caressed its barky planks, and was soon thereafter to scale its branchy ranks. Hiding poorly a telltale angst, I nearly stopped short of the top, yet was tugged upward for its sweet airs to eavesdrop. Once there, at that close-up summit of my tree, I reached out and rediscovered thee. When I climbed back homebound, a lifetime rewound, I arrived again, that other me. Climb my prose poem tree, make it ours to top cap, 'twould be my decree. Scale its ranks to summit, then reaching out unafraid to plummet, but point blank to be set free. Free as an eaglet, which in its strong beak shall be tended your prophet's amulet to keep thee safe from strife and mishap. Hey, you know what? In recap, it occurs to me that all you cats are having the time of my life. I think I'll take a break. In the meanwhile, please, do please, keep the faith.
If you have any comments or other remarks, and that I perhaps could even read on some of these broadcasts, please do not hesitate to write to me, Carmine Arena, P.O. Box 1029, Larchmont, New York 10538.